What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. In this episode, Bryan and I are just going to cover some things that have been on the top of our mind. For those of you that do not follow my social media activities, I have been, by myself for about a week now, traveling back as I settle back home here in Bali. But I had a little stopover, a few days, like 3 days in Hong Kong. And I've really just spent literally 7 days not speaking to anyone besides myself, besides like ordering food or signing up at the gym. So I've just had a lot of time to sit and think, and then it's been quite revealing for some things. So we're gonna touch on some of the things off the top of my mind, touch on some of the things off the top of Bryan's mind. But like always, Bryan, can you kick us off with some updates, please?
Yeah, I feel like the updates are like a lot of the things on my mind. So it all kind of maybe blends together and it's all just like one big running chat topic, chat GPT in my head or something like that. But yeah, dude, I love the time that I used to get away from Kim, and not because I don't want to be around Kim, but because like you kind of alluded to, that time where you are by yourself and you're not speaking to people really is a time where you can just do what you want and you don't have to like check in with anybody, which is really nice. But it's also time for you to explore like what's going on inside your head. And as we'll discuss on here, I know you've been getting 30,000 steps a day or more. And when you're just going around doing that, exploring things, there's a lot of like self-talk that also kind of occurs along the way. And so I'm excited to hear kind of everything that's been going on with you. So I have a decent amount of things here that are on my mind. I'll just kind of start with one or two of them and pop it over to you, and we can kind of create a dialogue out of this. But the first thing on my mind is that Cass just hit me up last night as I was going to sleep and said that Milo is going to be in town today doing some collab stuff with N1. And I knew Milo was in the US because he just posted that he was in New York with Schoenfeld doing something. But now apparently he's at N1 today. So my plan is to get up there and say what up to Milo. Unfortunately, or I don't know if it's unfortunate or not, but as I mentioned on the last episode, I'm getting this really thorough blood panel done on Thursday, which is 2 days from now. And so yesterday, which was Monday, was my last day training. I did kind of a moderate effort deload full body session, knowing I wasn't going to train again for 3 or 4 days. Also got a really solid zone 2 session in. I have some additional discussion points around cardio as we get going. But that was pretty much my last workout of the day. So today I'm either going to like just very casually bike up to N1 and say what up to Milo, or maybe even just drive so I don't exert any energy. And the plan for the next couple of days is just to do 10 or 12,000 steps and stay away from any weights. For anyone that missed the last episode, I had just found out in the last couple months that you're supposed to take a few days off of intense training before blood work, specifically for kidney markers, liver enzyme markers, and then I think things like oxidative stress and reverse T3 and stuff like that are probably affected by training at some level as well. So my plan is to just kind of chill these next few days and then get ready for my new cycle that's starting on, I guess, officially for everyone else following the program. It'll be starting on Sunday, June 4th. Because I will have taken 3 or 4 days off, I'm probably going to start this thing the day that I do my blood work and come home and do a session right after that. But excited to say what up to Milo today, see Cass, and just kind of spend the next couple days working a bit. And that's really all I got on my mind at the moment. I was just going to kick it over to you from here.
Yeah. So the biggest thing for me is my month-long trip back to the US, and then obviously the few days in Hong Kong. At the end of that is over. And in my notes here, I had in parentheses like "thank God," and it's been like an internal battle because at one point, like on one hand, just like 3 or 4 years ago, like doing this was a dream. You know what I mean? Like to be able to go back, spend a week in Denver, like have the money to rent a car and pay for an Airbnb and stuff, like while we're still paying rent, here, and just like be free. It was a dream, and now I've been able to like do those things. obviously see my mom and sister who I saw my mom last year, but I haven't seen my sister in 4 years. But then it was kind of overshadowed with the fact that like right now in my current phase of life, I am very, very goal oriented. And I think a little bit of that is like, I'm really enjoying the business side of things with, clients and delivering results and that sort of thing. I'm really enjoying like swinging for the fences on my own physique and pushing this, gaining period and stuff. I know that time is of the essence per se. And as we age, things don't get any easier, right? You're not doing yourself any favors as things get, as you get older. And just the time, which we're going to talk on a little bit more, is like, I literally made zero progress for an entire month, like zero progress. My weight average only continued to slide. And that was very, very frustrating for me. And I just realized like I'm at a period in my life where I just want to work on goals. And I literally want to just eat, train, work, have like 1 or 2 meals per night where I hang out with Jenny and, we catch up and shit. And that's all I'm really interested in doing. And this was like an entire month of everything kind of but that, like suboptimal training sessions, doing the best I can of like getting meals, in, but just being on the go, seeing friends, family, like timings off, being in different equipment, lots of hours back and forth in the car. And it just frustrated me, more than I should say it should have, but it really did quite frustrate me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you really do have this like sweet spot, this pocket of time before you guys like move back to the US, have kids and life happens and stuff. But I mean,
Exactly.
like I understand and I empathize with your plight. But at the same time, I think there's a number of people listening right now that would be like, oh, poor Aaron, like he takes a month to travel the US and he loses weight because he can't get all his meals in. And like, it's like, it could be the opposite way where you go on vacation and suddenly like, you gain a bunch of pounds because you're eating like crap and you're not being active and like all this stuff. And so, yeah, I guess there's two sides to that coin a little bit.
Yeah, and I get that part as well. But I mean, the really funny thing I find with that is like I lived that life. You know what I mean? I had that office job, slinging code and that sort of thing. And when the best example I really love is back when I still had my 9 to 5 and everything like that. I had a friend group, and the one friend, his name's Jordan. He was an entrepreneur and he like did different things and stuff like that. And one of the running jokes is he never knew what day of the week it was. And one of the things that people would be like, must be nice, Jordan, to not know what day of the week it is. But like the funny thing is like now, and if it's not Monday or Tuesday, I forget sometimes, especially like Wednesday through Friday, I mix up, especially Thursday and Friday. I get mixed up a little bit. And the reality there is like, if you are someone, you're like, oh, well, yeah, must be nice, Aaron, to like do these things, like roll the dice, quit your job, sell your car, cancel Netflix, Amazon, sell your shit, like take the jump. And then, when you've gone on the other side of it, like you have the freedom to complain and those sorts of things, because like Bryan and I, like we took the jump, we took that leap and bet on ourselves. And like, we're fortunately on the other side of it. But like we've touched on in other episodes, there was a lot of ups and downs, especially in the beginnings sort of thing. So it's always like hindsight is always kind of 2020 and looking back on it. But yeah. It was, like you said, I'm in a pocket before life like gets real for real. And I know I'm never going to have this time again. So I'm really just trying to be of the capitalize on it per se.
Well, for sure. And one of the positives, I guess, to like when you do settle down and you do have kids and you have like a home base and stuff like that is that, yeah, you have the kid and that's going to have like some impact on the amount of time that you have to like build your business and potentially train and whatever. But it also has the positive benefit of actually like keeping you in one place. And so you don't have a lot of these experiences where you're out traveling around at the peril of whatever the food is that's available. Like you literally are going to live in just as a structured of a manner as you are now, which I think is one way in which like Father Aaron is going to be pretty conducive to like Aaron's goals. And so there's certainly going to be challenges, along the way with having kids too. But I think that lifestyle is actually going to be pretty in line with the way that you want to live with the regimented style that you have.
Yeah. And the really funny thing is, it's not, at least how I perceive it, it's not like I'm like, oh man, I want that routine. It's just how I do better, I've found. Like in theory, we all want the like, oh, just eat, whatever you feel like, and like have work whenever you want to, work at the beach, like all that. Like
Yeah.
I tried that. I'm fucking miserable. I hate it. I'm unproductive. Like I don't feel good. I'm not like happy about how my physique is. Like it really stems from just how I do better. Like I thrive on routine, and it's not really sexy, but it does feel a lot better for me.
Yeah.
And one of the things I have like a little bit later on, but I we can just rope this in now. I have here like one of the silver linings about getting older is you find out more about yourself. And I know like for example, like I touched on, like I haven't talked to anybody besides very, minor interactions in like 7 days now. Before, like if I was like in my mid 20s, whatever, I would like try and force myself to go like socialize. You'd be like, oh, you're being too introverted. You need to go like do these things and like meet people. But now I realize like I'm really perfectly content with just having conversations with myself in my own head for like days on end. And so much so to the point where like on the one day in Hong Kong, I was like, I wonder how long it would take me to feel lonely. Like, I don't really know, like me and Jenny will be apart for like 2 weeks by the time she gets back. And then later this year, we may be apart for a month. And I'm really like curious. I'm like, I wonder how long it will take me to be like, I'm lonely. I'm going to go try and have like social interaction. I'm afraid at how long that might actually go, but it is something that I found like you just feel a lot more like comfortable with yourself as opposed to trying to change things about yourself. And like, don't get me wrong, there's things of course I always want to improve upon, but then there's like some personal characteristics that I'm like, I'm okay with this. It's no longer something that I want to actively try and like change. I just enjoy spending time by myself.
Yeah, it's interesting that you put it as like a silver lining of getting older, learning more about yourself. Because like while that is true, I often look at it and feel like as we get older, we get more stuck in our ways because we know more about ourselves and we're like, well, I like things this way and I want this to be this way. And like you get all curmudgeon-y when things don't go your way, And so there is something beautiful about being young where you just like are so adaptive and ready for any experience. Like Kim and I were lamenting on this the other day, how we need so much introverted time now because, everything is so busy with work and kids and social life and everything that we really value that time where we have nothing to do. But when you were younger, it's like, man, you were just always looking for something to do. Like if you're sitting around in your college apartment or post-college apartment and you're just like, shooting the shit, watching the TV by yourself, you're always just ready for someone to shoot you a text and be like, bro, you want to go to the bar? Or you want to go like play disc golf or whatever it is, like any opportunity to get up and do something. And it doesn't even matter if like it fits in line with your goals or your vision of yourself, because you're still forming that vision of yourself. It doesn't really even exist. It's like at the peril of those are around you and they're helping you form this vision of yourself. And so anyway, I thought that was a kind of an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah. And I guess the thing that I'm going to kind of turn this into is one of the downsides I would say to getting older is you're less impressionable. And this is something that I have here in one of my notes about Hong Kong, but if you remember so something that's very pivotal for me, and I was just explaining this to someone last week, when I was like, I think this song came out in 94 or 95. So I'm like 7-ish, maybe 8, the Nas and Lauryn Hill, If I Ruled the World song in that music video. Like I vividly remember where I was sitting when I watched that. And I just remember being like enamored by how cool it was in the music. And like, that was like the fire start of my like lifelong enjoyment of listening to like rap and hip hop music and that sort of thing. In those moments of when you're like super impressionable, as you get older, they get so much smaller because there's just less to experience, for the first time. And then when I was in Hong Kong, what was really cool and obviously kind of challenging is when you're in a completely foreign culture, when you're by yourself and you don't really know things, you there's new impressionable moments again, which was like really, really cool. Being able to experience something for the first time. In the kind of the notes I wrote down is I went to get sushi a few times because it was like a familiar food and I was out all day long and I know it's not going to potentially crush my stomach and create a 911 scenario. So I'm going to go with safe options. Sushi there is done a little bit differently in that you go in and you don't have like a server. You just order either from like an iPad at each table, or in the second place, like they just handed me like a QR code with like my seat number on it. And I ordered from my phone. But I go in and I'm like, oh, just for one. They sit me at like the sushi bar. They sit me next to a straight up child, right? I'm between like a man and his son on one side. On the other side of me is like an 8-year-old girl. So immediately I'm like, where is this girl's parents? You know what I mean? And like, we cannot communicate, nor am I going to even try to communicate with this child. That's another thing about getting older. Like you just can't speak to random children anymore. So I'm like, not even going to approach that.
Like a creepy American.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, I'm not even going to look to my left, but I'm thinking like, who just lets this child eat sushi by themselves sort of thing. So it's first. And then I figure out how to order. I'm like, okay, that worked out pretty straightforward. But then I noticed there's the drink menu is like limited to like soda and then like random other things. I'm like, I just want some water or tea. And I'm like looking around and there's like a little dispenser of hot water in front of me. And I have a teacup, but I have nothing else. So I'm just like, okay, maybe there's something I'm missing here. So I'm kind of just like looking around at people and I see this lady like shaking something into like the tea mug. So I'm like, okay, do I have one of those? I do. I open it. It's like pulverized green tea leaves. I'm like, okay. I put the powder in the cup and then I push the hot water dispenser and now I have green tea. Like, okay, figured that one out. Right. And then the next part of it is like your food, your sushi comes out in like these trains on a tray in front of you. And I'm just sitting there waiting and all of a sudden like food like stops in front of me. And I'm like, oh fuck, this is my food. And I'm like, do I grab it fast enough? And like, there's just so many brand new concepts and you're trying not to like fuck things up. And yes, people speak English there, but it's like, it's not great. And it's in a very, thick accent. So I was like, I'm going to try and, rely on that as least as possible. But it felt like I was like playing a puzzle of like, okay, I want sushi. I'm going to order it. There's these pieces I have to put together to figure it out. But it all worked out. And it was just like that was a little bit nerve wracking in the moment, but it was a brand new experience that I got to like figure out for the first time. And like, I was saying like the times that those opportunities present themselves get fewer and fewer as we get older.
I actually like fully resonate with that completely. And I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but toward the end of the period of time where Anders and I owned the gym and before I had my first child, so we're talking like 2015, 16-ish, I fell into this like super repetitive, monotonous approach to life where it just felt like every day was Groundhog Day almost. And I lacked a lot of what I would call awe and wonder. And you called it like impressionism or I can't remember exactly the word you used, but like I really felt like I lacked that awe and wonder. And that's one of the things that I think as you get older, you can only get in a few ways. And traveling is one of the amazing ways in which you can just feel kind of like a child again, like this awe and wonder around you, like you're the unknown, like you go somewhere and you're just like, I don't know what I'm in for in this moment. And so having kids is another example of that, of like every day you wake up and I mean, in many ways, the days are the same, but in many ways, they're also very unpredictable. And so I love that aspect of traveling and how it really kind of forces you outside your shell. And like we've talked about, it's like getting on your bike for the first time and going for a ride or doing something that you did as a child, So that actually parlays me into this next discussion point, which is I just bought Kim a bike, or we bought Kim a bike the other day. And she hasn't actually ridden a bike in 5 years, maybe even more, since we were in San Diego. So we brought her beach cruiser to to Boulder with us, and it sat in our garage and it has not gotten used a single time. I just want to like punt this thing to the curb because it takes up so much room and we're never going to use this stupid beach cruiser. So we went out and we bought her like a really nice mountain bike. It's actually nicer than my bike, which I had some hesitation about. But we have this friend here in town that's a mountain biking coach, and that's like her job, is she was a professional mountain biker. And she was like, whoever's the worst biker should have the nicer bike so that it evens out the playing field. And of course I'm just like, oh, but my bike was $2,000. Like, really, how much nicer do we need to go? You know, but we got her a bike and we took her out biking, and we did I showed her around the trails of Boulder. Like, we didn't do any dirt biking or gravel or anything. We just stayed on paved, and she got to like go out and bike, and we did 12 and a half miles her first day. And it was like, she noted that experience of like, wow, this is like being a kid again. And like, this is so invigorating, you know? And then to her credit, I think I was a little condescending because I was like, look, when I zone 2, this is how fast I go. And I don't think you're going to be able to keep up with me because, you know, whatever. And she's like, I have been Pelotoning. Like, I am in good cardiovascular shape. Like, don't tell me I can't keep up with you, you know? And we almost got in like a mini fight before going because I was like, look, I keep 180 watts and I need to keep 180 watts or I fall out of zone 2. And so eventually I just basically decided that I was going to approach this day of riding with her, not trying to get in zone 2 and just let it be whatever it was, you know? So I had to relinquish control of that situation a little bit. But she was impressive, man. Like, the first 5 miles of our 12-mile ride was a gradual incline, like maybe, 1 or 2 degrees, but it was uphill the whole time. And she literally was on my ass the whole time for me to stay in zone 2. I was like, babe, I'm in like high end zone 2. Like, we got to slow down a little bit, you know? So that was a bit of a slap in the face for me, but I was redeemed on the way back. So after the first 5 miles where we went up, then we had a 1 to 2 degree down for about 5 miles. And she was way too timid to go fast enough downhill to keep heart rate high. So while she was able to push me a bit on the incline, once we got to the downhill, my heart rate dropped into like the high 90s. And I was like, all right, like, this is what it is, you know? But when I do that same downhill on my own, I put the bike in the hardest gear and I literally pedal the entire time. And my heart rate is still 140 as I'm going downhill for 5 straight miles. So we'll work on that. We'll get there. But ultimately it was like a really cool experience. And I think the first of many where she and I are going to be able to get out and kind of do that together is, experience some of that novelty and awe in life.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it's funny that she made you kind of like eat your words. At
least on the uphill. Yeah.
On the uphill. But then on the downhill, the trepidation and the, I wouldn't say fear, but the trepidation on her part and then the lack of fear on your part. Like, see, I'm going to let my weight and gravity pull and my lack of fear just pull me ahead sort of thing.
Yeah.
That one's funny.
Yeah. What else you got?
I joined a new gym today. I am very, very excited. So there is a gym that opened here in the fall that it's a full Arsenal kit. But unfortunately, the Arsenal shipment was delayed by like 7 months or something like that. Something outrageous. But it's finally here. So I went today. It's good. They make good equipment. Like, as every piece, like, great. No, but like the leg equipment, which is, I would say for me, the majority of the things I care most about, because we can obviously modify so much with like cables and that sort of thing on upper body. The pendulum, the hack, the leg press, like seated leg extension, prone. It's good. I'm excited. And then the other gym that I was at, like, it's super popular, and it's been really, really cool from my standpoint to watch like 2 gyms open at pretty much the same time, watching the different approaches. The gym that I was previously at, Obsidian, is like killing it. They have like hundreds of members. People come there all day long to hang out. It's like a culture sort of place, but it's a Panada kit, and there's not a lot of space. And personally, like, I'm not going to lie, I think the Panada equipment kind of sucks. Like, I'll be super honest. Like, there's a couple good pieces, but like everyone in the space, it's like Panada's the best. I'm like, I don't think that word means what you think it means. So like,
Is there a Panada pendulum there?
no, they don't have that.
Interesting. They have one at the compound in San Diego, but it arrived like the day I was leaving, so I never got to try it.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. The equipment's beautiful. The upholstering is like very Italy sort of thing, but like the actual things that like you and I care about or you should care about,
Yeah.
they're like, it's not great. So yeah. And then, so getting back to what I was saying, this other gym didn't do as much heavy on the like marketing and that sort of thing. This new gym's a ghost town. Like the other gym is popping. It's packed. There's a million people hanging out, like at the pool doing all this. The other place, this it's a ghost town.
Mm.
Fortunately for me, like what I was talking about, I prefer the ghost town, right? I want to show up. No one's in there. Great. I don't want to talk to anyone anyway. And no one's on any equipment that I want. And I don't get caught in a conversation I don't want to be in those sorts of things. So for me, it's kind of a home run. And I'm excited to have like pretty decent equipment for a lot of things. I spent a couple minutes at the end of my push day on the pendulum today, just like, feeling it out and that sort of thing. And they have the adjustable, angle
Foot
pitch
plate
on the foot plate.
Yeah.
It's damn good. And,
So that's the Arsenal one.
The Arsenal one. Yeah. It goes
Yeah.
all the way down my ass to where I can keep my whole ass glued into the seat. It's pretty damn decent.
But the hack, they have the Arsenal hack, I assume, as well. And that's the one that I struggled with at the compound in San Diego, where I had to put the yoga pads on the shoulder pads to make sure that I could get enough depth and flatten the foot plate out and like really do some kind of personal modifications there to make it decent.
Yeah. That I think what I'm going to do is like I've pushed the hack for so long in my program. I'm just going to, I think starting next week, I'll just start the pendulum.
Sick. That's going to be dope. Progress that thing all the way through again. It's almost a new way of excitement and approach to progressive overload.
And that one too, it's like, I feel like it's a little bit less scary to like fail on how it's set up and how you can adjust the stop of that like little bump stop, how it's set. So I think I'll get very spicy in how I push that as well, without as much fear of like peeling myself out of the bottom, like how you have to on a hack squat, which can be a little bit sketchy. So I am quite excited, to be completely honest.
Is there a counterweight? I don't think there's a counterweight on the Arsenal one, is there? Or
there is. Yep.
Do you load it manually or it's already there?
It's fixed. Yeah, it's fixed.
Interesting. Cool. Well, that's dope, man. I'm excited to see how that goes. I know you've been hammering that hack for at least 6 months now, if not more.
Yeah.
Cool. So I have been diving into this podcast called Inside Exercise, and it was sent to me by a person that follows me on the gram. I've gotten a lot of people coming out of the woodwork now that are either ex cardio junkies or those that are, kind of hybrid-y style, where they're combining cardio and lifting kind of like I do. But a guy sent me a podcast from Inside Exercise, which the reason it was sent is because I have been, I think, somewhat closed-minded or maybe just unexposed to other forms of experts outside of the Peter Attia and Inigo San Milan and those people that also promote zone 2, as you would say. And so this first episode that was sent to me was with Andrew Coggin, who is, if you have heard the name, he's kind of like the person that discovered power output and how to use it in cardio programming. He's the guy that came up with, I think, the 7-zone system for cardio instead of the 5-zone system. And so the point of this podcast was basically for him to argue that there is really no magic in zone 2. And part of the argument was that the whole thing and this whole energy system exists on a continuum, which makes 100% sense. Like when you look at it, it's not like, so the idea promoted by Inigo San Milan, who coaches some of the top Tour de France cyclists in the world. And I think that's why he has this pedestal of respect from people. But his statement is that if you're in zone 2, you're not accumulating lactate, that you're essentially below this 2 millimole lactate level, and therefore you're not accumulating fatigue. And Andrew Coggin's approach or belief is that this whole thing exists on a continuum, and there's something called critical power. So it's either something that you can do forever for the rest of your life, like maybe it's moving your finger up and down, like maybe that's low enough effort that you can just do that for the rest of your life, or maybe it's breathing. Like it's basically things that are like critical to your existence. And then anything else above those repeatable tasks that you could do forever, they accumulate fatigue. And so this idea that you're in zone 2 and therefore you could do it forever and not have your lactate rise is essentially a naive thought, because the fact that you're doing anything like biking, pedaling, even walking, probably, eventually you're going to accumulate so much fatigue that you can't continue. And so trying to define zone 2 as this range where you just don't fatigue is a bit naive, right? It would be probably the word I would say. Maybe even a bit ignorant. So yeah, anyway, I thought it was really interesting. And this was the first podcast from Inside Exercise that was sent to me. And so I listened to it and it opened up my mind and expanded my thoughts a little bit and made me realize that I have been a bit biased by being exposed only to one side of maybe this argument. And so through this podcast, I've then started listening to, I've probably listened to like 20 of them now. And there's a very cool variety of experts on both sides of that argument that you can kind of get into and learn the physiology associated with it and stuff like that. So that was really cool. If you have any thoughts on any of that.
I do. I mean, first, let me touch on something that you said, like very, very related, and then I'll kind of extrapolate it at a more kind of theoretical level. I found out over my 3 days in Hong Kong that just walking will fatigue you quite much. And what's really funny is like, it would be my calves, like my high calves into the back of the knees is what would start first, like really bothering me. And I'd be like, Buck, I'm kind of far from like the hotel. And like my calves are like not doing okay. And that was on the first day. And I have a pair of Vans, right? Like for anyone out there, like the Comfy Cush Vans are amazing. It's like a different sole in them, but it's like walking on clouds, whereas the traditional like authentic Vans they're really heavy. And it will beat up your feet. But it's literally my favorite pair of shoes, like of all time. I literally just keep buying the same pair like every 4 months. My feet were like really, really beat up. And then, it was first my calves and then my feet. And then what would happen by the end of it, because I had 3 days in a row of 32,000 plus steps, my ankles felt like they were sprained. Like when you sprain an ankle and like you're starting to walk on it again, and every step you get that kind of like wincing pain, like in the ankle joint. Both feet were doing that.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But like when I was in the airport that last night, like I was on fumes. I was not doing so hot, and it was super late. It was like midnight, and I kind of botched some timing, because I don't know if you saw, but I bought my flight for a week ago.
I saw that. That's
so I had to like scramble and try and like, holy fuck, it's 8 p.m. I'm supposed to go to the airport in like 2 hours. I don't have a flight. So and then I just didn't eat because I was like rushing. And then you get to the airport, everything's closed. And I'm like sick. I probably had my last meal at like 6. I'm not going to be able to eat till like 8 a.m. the next day at the earliest, sort of thing. And I just walked, 33,000 steps that day.
For 3 straight days.
Yeah. And I trained on that Sunday as well. So I was just like, I fucked this up royally. But yeah, so that kind of thing with fatiguing for sure. And then a little bit of what you said, like, I would never say that you are a closed-minded person, Bryan, but just unexposed to some of the other things, right?
It's just not my specialty. Like I don't know the cardio world. Like I heard something and I dove into it, and now I'm expanding.
Yeah. And something with that I've been really big on this past year is like, the deeper that you go into topics and the more you learn about topics, the less concrete things become.
Yep.
That has been a very, very big one this year for me with like training and nutrition and clients in that sort of thing. And it's funny because now I have a number of like professional years, and stuff in this. And when people make absolute statements around something, I'm like, that's funny. You're just not quite far along enough on your journey, sort of thing. Like when people play the calories game, right? Like, oh, you're 180, or you get 2 people, right? both 5'10". This person's 180 pounds, trains 5 days per week. This other person is 205 pounds, trains 5 days per week. Let's say they have the same office job. Basic theory is like, oh, the person who's 205 pounds needs more calories to put on weight than the person who's 180 pounds, right? That doesn't always hold true. And if you're like someone that you're going to put your foot down on it, you just haven't experienced enough or learned enough or been around enough to see it with very educated, people. And that was something that was like, I've had a number of those things happening, I wouldn't even say recently, but in the last like 9-10 months or so. And it's been really opening my eyes to like, it's deep and it's incredibly individualized, and just being careful around how people say things, or especially myself, how I communicate things. And to kind of wrap this part up, I think like Lane Norton is someone who will make kind of not absolute statements, but very like cut and dry. And it really used to bother me for a while because I'd be like, I know that that's not true in 100% of the cases. But then I realized like when you have a platform that is 1 million people or whatever he has, you need to speak to your 85% of people. Yeah. And there's things that you're going to say that are not contextually true to that 15%. But if you try and extrapolate everything to the nuance and everything to that many people, like it's going to go way over the heads of the people that really, really need it. And it's something that I've realized like he does a really good job of speaking to a massive, wide audience of really drilling like what everyone needs to understand. But even though it may not, contextually apply to some small sub units of the population sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think even going back to our episode from last week about lifting to failure, like the way that meta regression has been polarized in the last week after it dropped from the data-driven strength guys, it's like you have so many people being like, yeah, see, I'm so validated, vindicated, like training to failure, but like at the end of the day, if you are so naive or novice in your interpretation that you just look at that and you say, well, training to failure is better than not training to failure, then you haven't considered all of the context that goes into the program that you're actually writing as far as how much volume and exercise selection. And like, man, the list can go on and on and on. And if you aren't deep into the thing, and you just look at that and take it for what it is, it's kind of like how I was taking zone 2 as like, hey, look, you just got to stay in zone 2 and you get all these mitochondrial benefits. So just to wrap up my thoughts on that and tie it all together here. So there's some experts that are one guy came on and he's been doing a bunch of research for a while. And he basically said that he believes that it's an 80-20 rule and that you need to spend 80% of your time under VT1, ventilation threshold 1, which is essentially like the beginning of zone 2. And so his proposal is that you spend most of your time under zone 2, and then you spend 20% of your time testing or racing or basically going super hard. And so he calls that polarized training. Like you're either really easy, like at recovery pace, or you're pushing the pace and you're going super hard. Andrew Coggin's view, the guy that created the idea or put forth the idea of critical power and the fact that it's a continuum, he basically was saying that these mitochondrial benefits that people are after with zone 2, they actually occur all the way along the chain. And it's just a matter of whether you're getting this extra fatigue that comes with the mitochondrial benefits. And it's a matter of you can't actually look at this whole continuum without coming together with the idea of intensity and duration. And so that's one big piece that I gathered from this whole discussion. And I think it actually relates to weightlifting super well too, because we would never talk about programming without intensity, frequency, and volume. And so in cardio, it's like, look, you can go short amount of time really hard and get mitochondrial benefits, or you can go really long, really slow and get mitochondrial benefits, or you could go kind of in the middle for like a medium amount of time and get mitochondrial benefits as well. And to me, it was like a light bulb went off and I was like, of course that's the way it is. Like why wouldn't it be that way? Like I know this to be true with strength training. So why would I even think that it's any way different with cardiovascular activity in the aerobic system, So it was in many ways very eye-opening for me. and change the way that I kind of, to the way that you said, like think about a lot of this stuff and kind of middling these worlds, you know?
Yeah, a quick follow-up question for you there. What's kind of fascinating is like, again, we're often so deep in this, and we've been doing, strength training and talking nutrition and that sort of thing for so long. We're so very well versed in intensity, in explaining that. But when it comes to cardio, like, to be completely honest, I do know very little. So when you were talking about these things, I'm like, I'm super green to it. So I was like, I wouldn't know what to believe. You know what I mean? Like, I could have these three arguments and I'd be like, if they were to say like, hey, two of these people are telling the truth, the other one's like a complete charlatan, like pick what's what. I'm like, I don't fucking know. And I'm like, oh my God, that's how people feel in the like gym world and stuff like that, and with like your Joel Seedman and crazy shit like that. So it was kind of just eye-opening for me there. But do you know, like, for example, progressive overload, right? The first time you do 3 sets of 8 at 20 pounds, like, you get the stimulus and then eventually the adaptation. Eventually that 3 sets of 8 at 20 pounds no longer elicits like a stimulus and adaptation, or a stimulus sufficient to produce an adaptation.
Yeah.
Does that hold true with cardio? For like example, we're in zone 2, 140 beats per minute, 40 minutes twice per week. Like, if after you do that for 2 months, do you need to start to, like, do you know anything around that? If it has a similar kind of carryover?
Yeah. So I think that with cardio, it's even almost more important to take that Bryan Minor philosophical approach to progressive overload, because the definition of your improvement in cardio is going to be the amount of watts that you can output and not your heart rate. So if you're just watching your heart rate, then you don't know if you're actually producing more power at a higher heart rate. Like, you could say, and I got caught in this trap too, where I was like, I'm doing my zone 2 at 135 beats per minute, and now it feels too easy, so I'm going to 140 beats per minute. But if I don't know that I'm producing more power at a higher heart rate, then I don't know that I'm actually improving. And then on top of that, another thing that I was introduced to in these podcasts that, again, makes 100% intuitive sense, and I think that I knew it, and there hadn't been a term to it, but it's called heart rate drift. And it essentially means that as you exercise, your heart rate goes higher for the same output level. So if I'm starting a cardio session at 180 watts and I can do that at 135 beats a minute, if I maintain 180 watts the whole time, my heart rate will eventually drift up. So it'll be 138 beats a minute, then it'll be 142, and then it'll be 144. And so if you're just looking at heart rate and you're not looking at power, then what will probably naturally happen is your power will actually go down because you're trying to keep your heart rate at the same place that it was before. And so if you don't have a way to have both power and heart rate as your metrics that you can work together and middle that ground, then yeah, you're probably not going to know whether progressive overload is actually occurring or not. Yeah. So anyway, that's that. And then the last thought that I have on this whole cardio thing, I was talking to Jordan Lips about this week. I sent him the same podcast that the guy sent me with Andrew Coggin. And one of the things that we were discussing was that these guys on this podcast are 100% endurance. They don't lift weights. They don't care about lifting weights at all. And it made us both think critically about how much cardio you really need to do for health and performance if you are lifting weights. And so then this made me think about, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but how high intensity interval training, these 20 to 60 second hard intervals that we do and then rest and recover, they're very similar to lifting weights. The energy systems are very similar. When you finish a heavy set of hack squats, pendulum squats, RDLs, whatever, your heart rate's probably like 160. You're in zone 4. And then you recover and you do it again, right? So in many ways, lifting weights is attacking the same energy system as interval training. So that almost makes me think that maybe there's even less benefit to these higher intensity intervals, and maybe there's more benefit to the lower intensity, steady state stuff because of the stimulus that we're already getting on the energy system from lifting weights. And also when they talk about like just the health impacts associated with cardio, it's like, man, you're getting so many of those positive health impacts just from lifting weights already. Like there is mitochondrial biogenesis occurring by lifting weights. You're creating a glucose tank for yourself, making yourself more glucose sensitive. Like all of these positive physical adaptations are happening because of lifting weights. And so maybe the amount of dose of cardio that you need to optimize health is lower than what the endurance community would say that you need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to add on to that that would not be like purely of this exact moment speculation. Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I think it's so open, to so many different things. Like I've been doing the hit cardio. I've got a lot of benefit from it,
Yeah.
but I do not know that is actually like, mitochondrial efficiency, those sorts of things. I don't know if there's like actual like heart markers sort of thing, but it has been very beneficial in terms of like testing your metal sort of thing. And yeah, I do not know is all I'm really saying there.
Yeah, I don't know either 100%. Like it's 100% speculation, and it's just cool that I'm continuing to learn, open my mind, and it's forcing me to kind of think about things from a multifaceted perspective instead of just the one train of thought and information and education that I had, 3 weeks ago compared to where I am now.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. What else you got?
The last thing I kind of had here is from my trip. Again, I was just doing a lot of thinking, especially around the like, even someone like myself, where 80% of my decisions are going to be, I'm in control of a lot of it. I have zero problems from a social perspective being like, oh, Aaron, the group decided we're going to get like, whatever, fucking hot dogs. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not coming. Like I have zero qualms about being like, yeah, go, please. I'm not fucking going. But it was still like that 80% of me being on literally was regression. Like it's not even like, oh, I didn't improve it. Like I literally regressed. And it really had me thinking about that like 80-20 principle that's like very, very big and pushed in the fitness community. And I see it with a lot of clientele that come in, and depends on the type of client, right? There's times where this will be for certain client very applicable, someone who's quite overweight, leads quite an unhealthy lifestyle, and is prone to like catching a case of the fuck it's or the I'll start again on Mondays. Like 80% in that context, wonderful. But what I have here is like, this is that often gets sold is like as a fitness principle that gets misapplied to the population that it is no longer a needle mover for, where it becomes at best auto regulation, which has its place, right? You go on a family vacation or something like that. You're like, hey, I just don't want to add fat while I'm gone. Great use case, right? Auto regulation. But then, at a worst case, in the context of myself, like that's a regression. And I think understanding that, and I kind of pulled some numbers here so these are from the journal Clinical Nutrition, right? And it's all on body fat percentages. So healthy body fat percentage is based on age. So there's kind of two age ranges, but the numbers, change by like 1%. So for women, we're really looking at like 21% to 33%. Like that is the definition of like a healthy, I'm using air quotes here, like body fat range. Quite a massive range. At a woman, 21% is quite lean, like not on stage, but like you're in damn good shape sort of thing. Potentially even around the like loss of cycle leanness sort of thing for some people on the lower end of that. So the upper range of that is around like 33%. So remember that number. And then for males, we're looking like 8% to like 21%. That's like the definition of healthy. For people on the lower end of that, 80% is a regression, right? Let's call that at what it is. For people on the upper range of that, if you're like a male at like 21%, a female at like 32%, that 80-20 kind of principle is probably not enough to continue to move the needle for you for the context of your goals, right? The majority, I would say like 90% of, people who are interested in health and fitness, are working with a coach or something like that, are looking for fat loss or some physique improvement sort of thing. And for many of those people, that 80-20 principle just is not enough to consistently move the needle. And I think it's something that it's like sold as like a simpler buy-in sort of thing, but then it just doesn't deliver enough on the back end. And I think because we know there's so in life, especially let's call it like probably the average age of like our listenership, children, significant other, career, those sorts of things, you're already getting wild cards coming in. And if you're already planning at an 80% plus some wild cards, like it's not enough to move the needle is what I've really, really found. And that has been a big one over the past, like, I would say like 6 months of really drilling that with clients who are in that gap of like, hey, you come to me like you don't have abs, but you're 20% body fat. Like we're not overweight. We're not unhealthy. Everything that we're chasing is almost purely aesthetic. That's just not going to, the beers unchecked on the weekends and those sorts of things. Like they won't cut it anymore, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes total sense. I think that it's like you alluded to, it's a matter of how close you are to your goal. And so somebody who's at that higher end of the range, or maybe even above it, like they could do 50-50 and probably make progress initially. Like if you're just doing whatever you want and not thinking about it at all, just the fact that you're thinking about it and having like 1 or 2 meals a day that seem to be healthier than what you were doing, that's progress. And then as you get to like the point where 80-20 works, like maybe you're approaching some of your goals and you're like, wow, I've really got it dialed in. Like 5 days a week, I'm crushing it. Like during the weeks, I'm on point. On the weekends, I have a couple beers, eat some fried food, like lose some sleep, whatever, 80-20, And so that'll work for a while. And then you continue making progress. And as you get closer and closer and closer to your goal, it's like, okay, now 90-10 works. And then 90-10 stops working. And now 95-5 is working. And then eventually you get to Aaron's level and you're like, man, if I am any worse than 99-1, I am just totally screwed and I make no progress, And so, yeah, it's the same idea as how you have to optimize your training as you get closer to your goals too. Like at some level for people that are new, just showing up and lifting weights works. And you don't have to think about proximity to failure or exercise selection or optimizing anything. You just show up and you do stuff. And then eventually you have to worry about, man, is my hack squat 1 rep from failure or 2 reps from failure? How am I going to progressively overload this? Where am I going to pause? What's my exercise order? Am I doing the hack squat first or second or third? What other exercises am I including? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so all of that can be extrapolated out to the same idea of, is it 80-20 or is it 95-5 or 60-40 or whatever? Like, depends where you are in your journey, right?
That was probably the biggest light bulb thing for me this time. Is it was like I've had some feelings around it, but nothing that I really like wrapped my head around from a framing standpoint. But as I said, I've done a lot of thinking, spending time by myself, and that was one where I feel rather convicted at this point.
Yeah. So when you look at the total number of clients that you have, that, the majority of them aren't going to be at the same level that you are, of course, where they need to be 98-2 or whatever the ratio is for you to actually make progress. What do you think like the average is of your clients? Like, where do you think they need to be to make progress?
Higher than I would say people really like to think, because their progress is I shouldn't say it's a subjective term, but it's a spectrum, right? And the way that I frame it is I find that I think this is a big kind of like downside of the rise of like flexible dieting and stuff, where it's like with flexible diet, you have planned variation, right? The whole nature of it is variation. When we have more variation, what do we have? A lesser control, less progress, right? And something that I find in conversations I have is like, we're doing like we're having progress, but let's say our average drops by like 0.3 pounds like week over week or something like that. I'm like, listen, we can do this in diet for like 10 months to lose these 20 pounds, or we can put the fucking hammer down for 7 or 8 weeks and get it done with. And then you can come back and start having beers and that sort of thing. So I think like I found myself having that conversation like more and more because people try and do the 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And then things just stretch on for months and months and months because there's so many non-progress weeks or regression weeks. And it's been something I've been like, hey, how about we quit drinking for 2 months? We lose these 20 pounds and then we just go into auto regulation, instead of trying to run in circles and be like, yeah, they got out of hand this weekend. And then it's like, okay, we have literally a zero effective progression from an average this week, and then just shutting some of those down. So it really depends on the client, because there's the people who, hey, Monday through Thursday, it's to a T. You know what I mean? We're good. And then we have like a meal, like a work meal, and maybe some whiskey or something like that straight on like Friday and Saturday night. I'm like, okay, we can get away with that. But then the people where like Monday through Thursday is like macros look pretty good, but we have like 200, grams of carbs with dinner sort of thing. And it was far away from training time and those sorts of things. Like that's where it's like, it's yes, the macros are on point, but your timing's way different. And it really is hard to say, but I would say the more, again, that you plan for the deviation, the less progress that there is inherently because you're planning for deviation.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. You mentioned timing, and that actually spawns another kind of what's been on my mind recently thought. And that is this idea of eating with circadian rhythm. And I've obviously been listening to people talk about this for a number of years now, between Sigma Nutrition and Grant Tinsley and the other kind of experts that are out there doing the rounds on this. But like as a personal N of one anecdote, I can definitely say now that I notice significant decrease in the quality of my sleep and the way that I feel the next day if I eat too close to bedtime. And so it's something I've been like really cognizant about, is trying to make sure that the last food I consume is at least 2, if not 3 hours before bedtime, and how much of a difference that makes, which is kind of counter to the way that I generally would approach nutrition, which is I would fast in the morning, at least skip breakfast, and then backload most of my calories. But I've realized when I do it the other way, and I tend to eat more in the morning and through the earlier parts of the day, and then have my final meal at 5:30 or 6, things just go better. My body functions better. Things are more regular. I sleep better. And I have better attitude about things too. So I thought that was interesting, and just kind of not one of the things I wrote down, just spawned by your comment there. And I know you're in your gaining phase, so you just eat whenever you need to eat. But have you noticed any of the similar way that it impacts you?
Personally, no. With clientele, yeah. And that's one of the really cool things about coaching, is like once you get to a certain threshold where you have enough exposure to different people and things like that. Like I have my, like, it's not like my proprietary system or whatever, but I'm like, these are my like tenets of the things that we are going to work through, because I'm confident that they are going to be a very good base for us. And then you get people who just respond differently. Like some people, yeah, if they eat close to bed, it's awful. Other people, they need to eat close to bed, or they get way too hungry in the middle of the night, sort of thing. So it's that one I found is very, very individualized. Mm-hmm. And there is some things that you can do to like kind of modify it a little bit, but like that is one that, yeah, I found is very, very individual, and you don't really know what you're going to get until you try some things and then see what works for
Have you noticed any correlation with age with that one? Because from my experience and talking to others, I have had no problem eating close to bed up until the last few years. Like I would say most people are fine until their early mid 30s. And then at some point, as we get older, it's like the metabolism doesn't, I don't know if it's a metabolic thing. Like I don't feel like my metabolism is slowed down a lot, but I know that is a common thing that people tend to feel like they experience, which is as that one meta that showed a number of years ago, it seems to be a result of lack of activity and change of lifestyle more than just aging. But yeah, my body just doesn't seem to process larger meals close to bedtime as well as it did before. Like I just feel like, you know, a little kind of like gurgling in the stomach as I'm laying down versus I don't know. Anyway, if you notice any age correlation.
I think if I'm correct, our bodies produce less HCl, stomach acid, as we get older. I think that from that theory, or that if I am true with that or correct with that, that would be indicative of things not, you just less acid, your digestive capacity decreases with that,
Right.
especially in an acute time period sort of thing. That I believe should be correlative if that is true, but I haven't really put that together with clients yet. Like the client that I know, we have to put aside a snack for like late at night. I want to say he's like 45, so that I haven't found to hold true across my client population yet.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I have one more thing on my mind, and we touched on it in the last episode too. But like in the prior episode, we kind of discussed the lengthened partials and the two different ways that I approach it versus the way that like the evidence or Milo would approach it. And so, as somebody that likes to explore and be as open-minded as possible, I have continued experimenting in the last few weeks with doing these more like evidence-based lengthened partials, if you want to call it that, where essentially you establish a predetermined range of motion stop, and then you go to that range of motion stop each rep instead of letting range of motion fall off as you fatigue rep by rep. I still think there's, of course, utility in both ways, and I think it's very movement dependent. But I've been experimenting with these. And there's one specific case that I've found for both myself and my client, Jeff, that has been not surprising, but I think maybe something that I apply much more commonly for myself going forward is on tricep movements. Push downs, so the cross cable push down or the cross cable overhead extension or the single arm versions of either one. There just seems to be something much more comfortable about not forcing the lockout on the elbow at the short position of these tricep movements. And it's weird because like you're watching the video, or I watch the video of myself doing these or of my client doing them, and it almost looks like you're doing a full range of motion. But when you compare it to actually doing full range of motion, where you have to like fully lock the elbow out to get that contraction of the tricep versus you're just kind of like hitting a point and releasing. On video, it almost looks like you're doing the same thing, but in practice, what you're feeling, it just feels so much cleaner not to have to force through that last like few degrees of that range of motion. And you just get the stretch on your tricep, you contract and release without actually getting it fully short. And both myself and Jeff have commented in the last week and had a discussion around how much cleaner it feels, how much the stimulus seems to be improved, and just less aggravation on the elbow joint in general.
I literally did those today, and it's been I don't like it. It's literally like the last like maybe 5 degrees of the but to me it feels like a second motion.
Yeah.
You know, like I feel like I almost have to go into like shoulder extension to like try and you're trying to do a lot of things just to get that elbow to like lock out. And yeah, I don't like it. And many times like I can avoid elbow pain if I don't do that portion. And I literally might just, take this and run with it and just stop trying to get that last one. Like I was literally today, I've been doing some like more metabolic style esque work with my triceps because I have that like tricep tendonitis,
Yeah.
So I was doing like a 6x8 sort of thing to wrap up just to get some in there. And I had to like cut the weight in half because that lockout I couldn't use the next weight stack. But if I was only doing like a 80% ROM or whatever, I would have very easily been able to do it. And it might be something that I just kind of take that approach and not, go for like a very full range because of just the, I guess, difficulty there.
Yeah.
in it.
Yeah, it seems to be exponentially more difficult. And like you said, that the saying going into shoulder extension, it really is like a really good way of describing it, because you're like you're almost like at full elbow extension, but then to get the last bit of elbow extension, you're having to like almost use the rear delt and a bit of, like you said, shoulder extension, like opening up to just get that arm to lock out. And it just doesn't seem worth it. Like, it's so hard to get there and so unnecessary. And then it's kind of like the opposite problem on the overhead version, because there's no resistance at the top. So it's like, why am I going there? It's kind of like the top of the back squat. Like, why are you going to the top of the back squat and hanging out when there's nothing happening there? And it's kind of like the same thing in the overhead extension, where you get to the top and you're like, oh, cool, I'm just resting right now, like all good. And if you avoid that, then it makes it a lot harder. I've been experimenting with this approach as well on some of my compound leg movements. And I tried it on both the pendulum and on my hack press. And man, I am very torn, because it does feel harder because you're not getting that like moment of reprieve at the top. But it really does, like, it forces you to have to use less weight. And I don't know where I stand on that issue. Like, in some ways, my mind says, well, if you're using less weight and you're still taking the muscle to failure or close to failure, then you're getting more stimulus with less fatigue. So maybe that's better. But then the other side of me is like, well, if I just lock out at the top for a split second and descend back down, I can use a lot more weight, which then exposes my muscles to potentially deeper levels of mechanical tension at the stretched position. And so I don't know what I think about it, but I know that whatever I do as a partial for my compound leg movement, it feels like partial to me. And then I look at the video and I feel like I'm going up almost all the way to lockout. And I'm like, man, how low do I really need to go for this to be like a 60% range of motion rep versus what it feels like? And for somebody that's been training 25 years, I'm still struggling with this idea of just getting barely above parallel and descending back down. Like, my natural inclination is you need to get through parallel and almost lock out and then change direction. And it doesn't look like what it feels like in my brain.
That one, I don't know. Like you said, I don't feel confident speaking in either direction.
Yeah.
I think there is a dude. Oh man, we live in this strange world where you don't know people's names. You only know their like Instagram handles, and it's like it's TNF something. And he's a little bit broy, and he like kind of pushes some BS supplements and stuff like that. But his advice and stuff on training is like, there are things I agree with. I think he does a quality job there, and he has stuff about his like he's only training quads, once per week, but he does a lot of like I take the leg press to failure, and then I do like bottom range partials as far as I can get until it pins me at the very bottom. And then I like roll myself out of it. And he does that with different things. And like there, I think that utility is there, but again, you're in the pain cave to get there.
Yeah.
Hardcore. But I think like if and when I may incorporate some of that sort of style of it, but man, I've been getting such bad quad DOMs doing what I'm doing already. I couldn't imagine.
Right.
Yeah. And that was I guess one last thing for me to wrap up. The stimulus to recovery thing has been very, very interesting for me. I had a period, great example. My mom and sister were in town. I was like, we're going to eat healthy foods. I was in charge of food, but like, I just wasn't getting the volume in calories and carbohydrate that I needed. Because I knew I had the week of traveling, I was like, I'm going to train legs on Sunday, like right after they leave. I go in, I'm doing the best that I can. I cannot get the quad stimulus that I'm after. I basically, some sets of leg extensions. I was like, I'm going to do 1 myo rep set on the leg press and like make it suck sort of thing. And then I did like 2 sets of Smith machine squats, like literally like 6-7 working sets on the day. I wake up in a world of pain on Monday, and I shit you not, it didn't go away until Saturday. 6 days. Yeah. And it was like they were so bad. And I think it got kind of, I wouldn't say it got worse, but I had the travel day in the middle. We were sitting on an airplane for, my first flight was 14 hours. I get up like halfway through to pee, and like my legs would barely move. And I was like, I had to like hold on to the seats to fucking walk back. This is now Wednesday. I trained them on Sunday.
Yeah, it's
And
insane.
and it really like made me think about just like the recovery aspect and like getting food in on the back. And like when your training is reaching those upper intensities, that's when like your timing and being carbohydrate compensated and sodium compensated and really electrolyte compensated, like those things matter so much more, because you're talking like that's the difference between like a 3 to 4 day recovery and like a fucking 6 day one like I had.
No, that's really interesting. And it actually, just to wrap it up, it's kind of related, but somewhat unrelated. The most recent Iron Culture episode with Eric and Omar, they were talking about the meta regression from Data Driven. And Eric was kind of toward the end, was wrapping up with some thoughts. And he goes, one of the things that I think has come to light with this meta regression and with some other stuff recently is it's almost been vindication for the bro split. Because a couple years ago, he's like, if you would ask me, I would have told you that frequency by itself was a separate indicator of stimulus, that, if you can train something 3 days a week instead of 1 day a week, separate from volume, just the fact that you're training it more seems to be an indicator of higher stimulus, of more muscle growth, whatever. And he goes, now it seems like what we've seen in the last few years is that frequency simply is an artifact of volume. That it's, if you will use frequency as a means of distributing volume, like if you're doing more than 10 sets per muscle group in a session, then you probably should split that over 2 sessions. But he goes, more than anything, like this research has shown that if you are doing a relatively low volume and you want to take it to the house once a week and then recover and do it again a week later, that seems to be just as effective as splitting that volume across multiple sessions. And it just made me think about that, because what you were saying, where you're like, man, I was sore for 6 days. And it's like, if you do a significant amount of volume for certain muscle groups like quads, hamstrings, other muscle groups that are susceptible to high levels of damage with highly lengthened movements and stuff like that, maybe you don't need to feel like you're on this treadmill having to train that muscle every 3 or 4 days, or else you're somehow leaving gains on the table,
Yeah. I mean, kind of what I alluded to earlier in the episode, like the deeper I go, the more I learn, the more I realize how much there really is to learn, and how, not, I don't want to say unconcrete, but how, I guess, shaky some of the concrete becomes over the years.
Yeah. No, well said. Yeah, I got nothing else to add, dude. That's a good way of wrapping it up.
Cool. I think this was a really, really fun episode. Shared a little bit about us and some of just our presiding on some things. As always, guys, thank you for listening. Bryan and I will talk to you next week.